everyone to this Axiomatics webinar. For those of you not familiar with GoToWebinar, here are a couple of guidelines that you can keep in mind. First of all, everyone is centrally muted, so you can go ahead and munch on your crisps as you watch the webinar. Secondly, the webinar is recorded and we will publish it eventually on our website and on YouTube. The slides used today for this webinar will be made available on SlideShare and our website as well. And we will be saving about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the webinar for a Q&A, and you can write questions in the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side in the questions section. We will be sharing the Q&A after the webinar as well so that everyone can benefit from the answers. Today's speakers are Roland Holtkämper, Managing Director at Holtkämper Professionals, and myself, David Bassard, VP Customer Relations for Axiomatics. Roland, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself for a couple minutes, please?
Thank you, David. Yeah, my name is Roland Holtkämper. I am a Managing Director at Holtkämper Professionals, and I am a senior expert for identity and access management for many years. I started my career as a project manager in the 90s at Commerzbank in Germany, in Frankfurt, and since almost 15 years I'm working as a consultant with a focus area of identity and access management and project management. Besides this, I have qualifications as a mathematician, which I received from university, and I have a degree of PMP from Project Management Institute for Project Management. Yeah, I think that's enough for a short introduction from my side.
Thanks, Roland. And for the usual crowd that attends Axiomatics webinars, you probably know me. I'm in charge of pre-sales, post-sales at Axiomatics, along with some marketing activities. So today's agenda, we will be focusing on attribute-based access control for the insurance sector, building on past customer cases we have had in Europe, in Germany specifically, but also in other countries such as the Nordics and Switzerland. We will be looking at common challenges that insurance companies face today in today's dynamic environment, and then we will move on to an introduction on attribute-based access control and what it entails. We will then focus on a few generic use cases that can be resolved, addressed through ABAC. And then, with the help of Roland, we will be talking about a customer use case from one of our German insurance companies in Germany, of course. And finally, we will close with a series of Q&A. So, first of all, let's talk about transactions. In today's world, everything is about sharing data. Data at rest has no value. So the goal is to be able to share information to create transactions between consumers and producers, between customers and companies, between patients and insurance companies. And the ability to do rapid, secure transactions depend largely on the efficient delegation of access rights, on the efficient delegation of powers, while at the same time you want to minimize the risk the company is taking. You want to minimize the potential losses that might occur from sharing the wrong amount of information. So secure transactions is about being able to determine who can access which information and for what purpose, and making sure that the right individuals always get access to the right amount of information without breaching any particular regulation. Historically, when it came to sharing information, medical information, insurance claims, policies, we had a choice between, we had a trade-off between either doing it slowly but surely. The information was stored in a cabinet. You would walk up to the person controlling access to the cabinet, you would ask him for the information, and they would check your credentials and you would have access to the information. That was a very slow and secure process through which only the right people had access to the information, but the delay was such that it hindered business. The alternative was to just share information quickly, very rapidly. That is what happened in the intelligence community in the United States 10 years ago, where everyone had access to all the information. And we know what that entails. That means that the wrong people with the wrong credentials will have access to much too much information, and of course that leads to issues such as WikiLeaks we have today. But the rationale or the question that we asked at Axiomatics was, why choose either slow and secure or fast and unsecure? Why can't we just combine the two? Let's go for fast access, but secure access, access that takes into account risk, that takes into account dynamic aspects of sharing information. And that's where ABAC, that's where attribute-based access control steps in. Use cases, common use cases that we've seen in the insurance space for insurance companies that call for attribute-based access control are some of the following. First of all, it's interesting to note that insurance companies don't have a flat structure. They have patients, they have customers, they have a long chain of agents that sell insurance policies. They potentially sell insurance policies in bulk to other companies. Those companies then redistribute the insurance policies to their employees. So there's a delegation between the insurance company, the administrator of the company, and then the employee of the company buying insurance from the insurance company. In addition, insurance, much like healthcare and finance, is a highly regulated environment, a highly regulated business where the information being handled is highly sensitive and where government regulators have stepped in to implement privacy checks, to implement rules that make sure that whatever information an insurance company holds about a patient, that they only use it for the right purpose of use, that they do not abuse their knowledge. Some of the data that an insurance company will hold at some point is medical information, will be claims, will be the salary of a victim, so on and so forth. Information that is highly sensitive, it should only be used for the right purposes. Another use case in the insurance sector is the fact that insurance companies have the obligation very often to store customer data, to store patient records, insurance policies, claims for a very long time. So the nature of the business calls for secure storage of that information. You cannot just create information and then destroy it or forget it. You have to keep it for many different reasons. The problem with these use cases and the problem with this current environment is that the current authorization model is very user-centric, and it is also extremely static. What we mean by that is the current authorization frameworks are capable of defining authorization based on roles or potentially based on groups, but it's always about the user. And it's never about the relationship between the user and the information being accessed, or between the user and the patient. So the current authorization models do not cater for relationships. In addition, they do not cater for multiple parameters, the new devices that we use, whether we're talking about mobile devices. They cannot cater for time of the day, for instance. So current models are user-centric and extremely static. Our goal with ABAC, our goal with attribute-based access control is to evolve from the static environment, from the user-centric environment, and add in new dimensions and make it more dynamic. Make it more dynamic to make it context-aware. When we say context-aware, what we mean is we want to be able to use information such as the device a user is accessing information from, the location that user is in, the relationship between the insurance company or the agent of the insurance company and the patient being whose record we are handling. Dynamic also comes into play because depending on the time of the day, you might allow a user to access information. At the end of the day, it's very often about relationships between a certain set of attributes and another set of attributes. I used here a couple of slides from Ian Glazer, who's the senior director of identity at Salesforce. And at the Identity Relationship Management Conference this month, a couple of weeks ago, Ian presented the notion of how to recreate a good identity and access management model. And what he was pointing out is that when you have multiple objects, multiple items, a patient, a surgeon, an insurance company, a partner, there are different relationships that build up between these items. And current models have been very much role-centric, user-centric, and hierarchical. However, this model here will not work because the environment we live in, the world we live in, is not static. It is not hierarchical. It's not hierarchy-based. It's more intricate. And we end up with a model like this, where at the center of the spider web, if you like, at the center of the graph, we have the patient, and then around the patient, you have multiple objects that gravitate: the surgeon, the insurance company, the partner, the GP, and all these different objects will have relationships. And based on those relationships, we should build the authorization policies, the authorization requirements that will determine who gets to view which piece of data and under which circumstances. And that requirement brings us to ABAC, or attribute-based access control. As some of you might know, the historical model that has been extremely widespread in the past is RBAC, or role-based access control. NIST has defined RBAC in an excellent set of papers that date back 10-20 years, and recently NIST have released a paper on attribute-based access control, and I recommend, it's the link at the bottom of the slide here, I recommend that you have a look at the NIST paper. Now, what is ABAC? First of all, ABAC is about describing everything in terms of attributes. Attributes that describe the user, attributes that describe the resource, attributes that describe the action, and attributes that describe the environment. So it's the four categories: as who, what, when, where, why, and how. And attributes, at the end of the day, it's a very simple concept. It's just a key value pair. For instance, role equals manager, or citizenship equals Norwegian. Attribute-based access control is the model, is the foundation for externalized authorization. If you look at the analyst world, Cooper-Cole or Gartner, they define our space as externalized authorization management or dynamic access management. ABAC is the foundation, is the model for this. With ABAC, you can finally express authorization logic in a standardized way and as policies. And that is fundamental because it now means that you can have a one-to-one mapping between original plain old English requirements and now technical policies, technical artifacts. And it means that there's a better correlation between the business requirements from the business analysts and the actual technical implementation. In addition, those policies will be managed centrally in an ABAC world. And that means that you will have a much better management capability. It will be cheaper to manage, and more importantly, your audit capability will be enhanced because now you can just go to one location, analyze the policies at that one location, and understand what authorization you're implementing throughout your entire architecture. The policies that ABAC utilize attributes to describe specific access rules. That's why we call it attribute-based. The attributes act as the building blocks of the policies, and there's no limit to how many attributes you can use or how you can combine them. Sky's the limit, your imagination is the limit, which means that you can express today's scenarios as well as tomorrow's scenarios, so ABAC is future-proof. Today, if you look at ABAC, the de facto standard that implements ABAC, or attribute-based access control, is the extensible access control markup language, an OASIS standard that has been around since 2001, and version 3 came out in 2013. With XACML, you can express multiple authorization scenarios, and you can easily implement them. Now, I recommend for additional reading on ABAC that you turn to the NIST special publication. You have the link on this slide, and we will be sharing the slides later. But also, we do have another webinar that we produced back in April on a business case for attribute-based access control, and I also recommend you do check it out. In ABAC, the architecture is as follows. You have a user, let's say Bob, and you have an application. That user will try to access the application. And in the middle, in that flow, we intercept the request and to enforce a decision. The enforcement point, the traffic lights on this slide, will look at the access request and convert it into an authorization request, which it then sends to an external authorization service. That authorization service, or policy decision point in XACML terminology, is the service that will look at the incoming authorization request, will look at the policies it knows, and will eventually reach a decision. Either yes, Bob can access record 22, or no, he cannot. In the process of evaluating its policies, the authorization engine might need to retrieve additional attributes, additional metadata. For instance, what is Bob's citizenship? What is Bob's role? What is his department? What about the record? Where does the record belong? What state is it in? How sensitive is it? All this metadata will be used by the authorization engine or the authorization service as it processes the policies and eventually reaches a decision. In this case, we get a permit back and access is allowed to the target application, and Bob could access record 22. This picture here is your basic ABAC 101 architecture slide. If there's anything you want to remember, this is the picture to remember. It also means, by the way, that ABAC promotes a technology-agnostic architecture. You can apply this model to your Java applications, your .NET applications, your mainframes, your databases, pretty much any layer in the architecture and any type of application. Now that we've briefly looked at ABAC, let's focus on how ABAC can help solve some business use cases in the insurance sector. The first use case that we have is the ability to enable automation in claims processing. When a claim is processed, different individuals in that flow will have to look at the claim, understand its validity, look at the metadata linked to the claim, understand whether to approve the claim, reroute the claim, deny the claim. And very often that task is done either by employees of the insurance companies or potentially employees of the company that is giving the insurance benefits to its own employees, or even potentially outsourced contractors working on the data. An insurance claim is made of highly sensitive information. It could be the name of the patient or the name of the victim if we want to use an insurance term. It could be the social security number of the victim. It could be their address. It could be their salary. Many different parameters that should not be shared with just anyone in the claims processing chain. A doctor would have the right to view the medical information relating to the claim, but the person processing the payment of the claim does not need to know what the medical condition was. That is highly sensitive PHI, personal health information, that should not be released to just anyone. With ABAC, what we can manage to achieve is to deliver better services to patients and healthcare providers, because it's not just a relationship between insurance companies and victims, it's also a relationship between insurance companies and also other healthcare actors. So deliver better services to patients and healthcare providers in a timely manner at a lower cost. A second use case that is perhaps very specific to the insurance world is delegation. Examples of delegation include, for instance, internal delegation. A customer representative or an insurance agent goes away on vacation or on paternity leave or maternity leave, and while that person is away, they need to give access to another colleague to their records, to their customer records, their victim records, such that the customers can still be handled while the person is away. With ABAC, you could implement this sort of internal delegation directly in the policy, so that scenario is covered from day one. You do not need special policies or special access. It is already implemented in the ABAC policies. There's another type of delegation that I call here external delegation, which is about the customer or the victim, or in this case just the customer, wanting to access a dependence records. When we say dependents, where we're thinking of minors such as children or elderly people who do not have the ability to check their own insurance claims. In that case, you want to delegate access to a legal guardian. And thirdly, another common case for applying ABAC to insurance is business-to-business relationships, where insurance companies subcontract or sell part of their insurance policies to other insurance companies and potentially to agents who themselves might have additional agents and selling it to other agents. In addition, insurance companies might also sell insurance in bulk to other companies such as Coca-Cola or Volvo. And there will be human resources individuals within those companies, within Volvo and within Coca-Cola, who will have to manage the insurance claims at some degree, but at the same time, we need to make sure that they do not see information that is sensitive that relates to the employees of the companies. Globally, a common use case to all three use cases, of course, is regulatory compliance, the ability to define ABAC policies that will control access to the information based on who the requesting user is. If you look at the diagram here, I have a victim. That victim has an insurance policy, and the victim has created a new claim. Our victim here, John Doe, has a claim that contains his name, his social security number, the medical information about the reason for the claim, as well as, in this case, the salary of the victim, since it might actually define the level of insurance the person will be getting. Who in the chain of handling the claim will get access to the information? Well, the claims adjuster who works at the insurance company. That's one person that might access, who might access the insurance record. You might also have the insurance agent who initially sold the insurance policy. He or she might want to view the claim. You might also have the human resources administrator who works at Volvo, where the victim, John Doe, works, and they might want to check how many claims a given employee has filed for a given year. Yet, not all three roles should get access to the same amount of information. Depending on their role, depending on their relationship to the victim, they should only get access to the relevant information. And what we want to do here is control access to the different fields. Privacy policies will kick in, e-health regulations will kick in, and of course you want to make sure that you apply the right policies that apply to the location where you're at. So EU regulations will apply across the European Union, but of course German-specific rules might apply to Germany. Swiss rules like DRG will apply to Swiss medical and insurance data. So now I'll turn over to today's specific use case. This stems from a customer we have in Germany, a large insurance company, and more particularly the group IT of that insurance company, providing web portals to its other entities within the company in order to process and manage car-related insurance policies. So we're moving away from health insurance and stepping into accident insurance and car insurance. The customer in question is a large insurance holding company in Germany, and that company has multiple entities that, in a way, act as their own brand. Multiple of those entities offer car insurance, so they might be in competition between one another. The goal for the holding company is to provide common IT tools that can be shared across all entities while guaranteeing segregation of duty and guaranteeing segregation between the different data sets. So the IT department of that insurance company came to us saying that they needed to build a web application, and at the same time they needed fine-grained authorization. Some of the key top-level requirements included the ability to do separation of data between the entities, of course, so multi-tenancy scenarios, the ability for each entity to maintain their own access policies, their own authorization policies, and the ability for user permissions within applications to depend on the data that might be in other external systems. So we need access to external sources of information in order to reach decisions. If we look at the background, historically, what the company has been trying to achieve was to have one centralized authorization service. That is the strategic goal for that company, and we see that as a goal for many large enterprises, many Fortune 500 customers. You want to rationalize your IT stack. You've already externalized authentication. Now you want to externalize and centralize the authorization piece. And to do that, you deploy a solution such as the Axiomatics policy server based on attribute-based access control, and you can achieve centralized authorization. The problem in the old model is that you end up with multiple authorization silos because you have to develop the authorization capability on a per application basis. So each application had its own authorization model with its own roles, with its own permissions set. The goal when deploying a centralized authorization service is to establish one centrally maintained trusted authorization service where you have one source of policies that you can easily audit, and then you can actually spread out the enforcement to the multiple applications. But either way, the apps will always go back and consume the centrally managed authorization, which means that now you have consistent enforcement of the very same set of authorization policies across the entire enterprise, no matter where your application sits. In doing so, you get rid of your authorization silos and you increase the quality of your authorization. The previous model that the customer had was a mainframe-based system, and that mainframe system had a fairly decent authorization model based on roles. It was relatively user-centric. A user would try to access an insurance claim, XYZ, and the claims administration system would go to the ABAC system and ask which claims or which permissions claims an insurance claims manager has. The role-based access control system would reply with the permissions the user has. For instance, in this example, look at claims, change claims, VIP claims. You can see that those permissions do not cater for the relationship between the insurance claim and the claims manager. That is out of scope, and that is something that ABAC systems cannot cater for, this dynamic contextual aspect. The goal for the new authorization system is to be able to not only express the relationship between the requesting person and the targeted data, but also to take into account more parameters, more attributes. If we look at the subject, for instance, the user ID is one parameter we're interested in, but also the tenant, the role, potentially the seniority of the person. And it's not just about who you are, it's not just about the user, it's also about the environment. What device are you using? What network are you sitting on? What's the time and the dates? And it's also about attributes of the targeted object, the insurance claim. Who's the tenant? What is the claim ID? What is the claim amount? What is the client ID? The authorization service should dynamically produce authorization based on business rules. So there must be a good mapping between the requirements from the business analysts and the technical implementation, the technical policies that match those business rules. So the question is, who should gain access to what, where, when, how, and why? This is next generation authorization service, attribute-based access control that is capable to cater for these different parameters, for these different angles. The new authorization system that was built by our customer therefore involved an authorization system that was based on the one hand on roles or policies and on the other on attributes. You still have the web portal through which you can manage the insurance claims, in this case for car accidents. You still have the claims manager, and the flow becomes the following. The claims manager sends a request to the web portal to view insurance claim on XYZ. And the web portal will send an authorization request, a yes/no question. Can claims manager process insurance claim XYZ? The authorization system will look at its policies, will potentially look at external attribute sources, and eventually reach a decision. Some of the business rules that you could have within the authorization system can be rules such as claims administrators and adjusters are not allowed to participate in the processing of a claim filed by an employee or a colleague. So you want to have, in this case, it's a separation of duty example. Some of the benefits and challenges that have been identified by the customer in implementing the process. First of all, the number one benefit is the decoupling, the separation of concern between application code and authorization logic. And the name externals can focus on business logic, and your security architects and your security developers can focus on the authorization logic. Secondly, the developers no longer need to worry about security or authorization anymore. All the better, all the merrier. Developers have never particularly liked to handle security. Thirdly, authorization rules can now be changed without impacting the application code. This is a huge benefit, especially when you have long development window cycles, and you do not want to wait 3 months before Axiomatics is based on the standard, the XACML, the Extensible Access Control Markup Language. To ask questions. It's a very simple yes/no way, and also you can integrate with more applications. You can migrate to different systems. However, it's not all perfect world, of course. There's always a shade of gray, and some of the challenges that have been that ABAC, it does introduce a new way of thinking, so you have to transition a little or evolve somehow from the RBAC way of thinking to the ABAC way of thinking. So that takes a bit of mental gymnastics. Secondly, complexity. ABAC doesn't introduce complexity, but since it introduces a new paradigm, you have to think now about policies on the one hand and attributes on the other. It's a slight difference from the RBAC model where all you have to deal with is roles and permissions that are directly assigned to the user. But it's a minor pain for a huge gain. Thirdly, the authorization system does need runtime access to business applications. Well, yes, that is true, because you want to be able to take into account runtime attributes, runtime information. That might be seen as a drawback, but as a matter of fact, it does help you deliver runtime, real-time authorization decisions instead of stale decisions, and that, of course, minimizes your risk. Finally, whenever retrieving additional attributes, you have to consider performance. Where do you read the attributes from? What is the latency? How can I cache those attributes to minimize the impact on the overall performance? So, Roland, before I move on to the final slide, what is your take on those benefits and challenges? Do you want to add anything to this list?
I think it's pretty good described here, and yes, as you mentioned, benefits alone are not available. Some challenges we were confronted with, and but I think we solved most of them, and I think we come to some more points in the next section of this webinar.
Thank you, Roland. So some of the experiences from this particular customer, German customer, and general feedback, as well as experience that we've gathered from other customers in the United States and in Europe. The first feedback is that the biggest challenge at the end of the day is not a technical challenge. The biggest challenge is to get business managers to define business rules and priorities and agree on them and set them in stone. Roland, what was your take on this particular feedback?
Yeah, yes, indeed. That was, I think, it was the biggest challenge. Regardless of an efficient software solution we found and implemented, it is still a long way to go to solve all these details of this challenge, to get all these business managers to their new responsibility to define and exactly find an exact definition of business rules, which they were not used to. As you mentioned before, it's a new paradigm which comes to a company who decides to introduce an ABAC system, and that is the point in this challenge. First divisions are already familiarized with this responsibility, and several others are not yet, but I think we will bring them to.
And you find that educating them is a fairly straightforward process, and that different teams are willing to onboard the new technology.
Yeah, exactly. We go this way, and sometimes it's hard to bring some of these responsibles to the new paradigm, but some are excited and really like their new responsibility, and that they are asked exactly what kind of authorization rule they really want to place there. That was not done any time before.
Thanks. So a second feedback that we received, both from this project and other projects, is that once policies are defined, it is very easy to create and change the set of policies for the authorization system. What was your take on that in your project, Roland?
Just, yeah, that is true as far as we had these kind of use cases. Very true. Some small changes, for example, one extension of a condition to implement delegated administration, just with an additional attribute, was done very quick and easy without the need of code change or application code change, and using extensive deployment procedures and appointments for deployments, which are strongly regulated in huge companies. So we were quite much more flexible, and that was a great experience so far.
Great. We've also seen this in other insurance companies where the ability to update policies quickly, authorization policies quickly, has been a definite win.
Yeah.
The third feedback here, you need to test cases for individual policy parts as well as the entire policy tree, whereby you want to test that one branch of a policy does work as intended, but also that that branch works within the global context of the policies, not just in isolation. What was your impression of that in your project, Roland?
Yeah, that is a good question, and the quick answer is we built test cases for every single policy, and we built in another stage of the test period, we built test scripts which were based on these test cases, but the special aspect of this script was the arrangement of these test cases within it. And these scripts were ran through all policies, respectively policy sets, and so we hit all the combinations we hold for with the expected likelihood we expect this. The big advantage of this way to test compared with the way it was done, it had to be done all the other years before when we did not have this kind of authorization system, is that we were able to test authorization separately and exclusive, where we could focus much more and better.
Right. A fourth item here, to decentralize the administration of policies, you must have business owners for the policies and the attributes. This may be a challenge. It's true that in ABAC, you now need to define attribute owners and policy owners, someone willing to take the responsibility, someone at the border between IT and the business world. Was that also your impression in your project?
That was not that big challenge. We were very aware of this decentralized responsibility, especially we were working on a system for within a holding which has to be delivered to all entities. So every entity responsible was picked up very early in the whole process, and yeah, and did his job quite good very early in this phase. So it was not that big challenge for us.
Good to hear. And a fifth feedback item here, while architects love the new model, developers often struggle with a no programming approach. What was your take on this, Roland?
So far, the developers could be tightly guided through the usage of the new approach and could get warmer and warmer with this. But if it's already a cornerstone for the right development, remains to be seen, because we were started with the car insurance part, and we were facing, or we are facing, some more parts of the whole insurance business of this company, and we might get in contact with several other teams of developers. So far we had the chance to tightly guide them, and that was the good aspect, which was a basic factor for the success.
That's very good to hear. And a sixth item, I'm sorry, I lost count here, is to plan attribute lookup with care. And we mentioned that briefly in the challenges of ABAC. A slow connection impacts overall response times. So this relates, Roland, if I'm not mistaken, to the authorization engine reaching out to external systems such as LDAP, web services, and databases to retrieve metadata. How did you mitigate this?
Yeah, we made mixed experiences with this issue so far. Some PIP connections, how we call them in the project, do not perform as much as required, but we found some optimization potential, which we were working on, and it seems to work in the right way, and it will improve. Other PIP connections performed quite good. These are connections which are under full control of our project team, and do not have to cross too many platforms, middleware systems, which bears or which keeps the biggest challenge for this part of technical implementation. If you have attribute stores which have to be retrieved through many different system parts and long ways through the whole IT.
Right. Thanks. So moving on to some recommendations here from Axiomatics. First of all, in terms of gathering policy requirements, it is very important that you make sure policymakers and attribute owners are identified and that they're made aware of their roles and responsibilities from day one. And the reason for that is you need to make sure that they're involved so that they can give their input on what the policy should be, and the attribute owners can give their input on what attributes can be used and how, and what the valid range of values is for these attributes. Another important point to keep in mind, of course, is to make sure you have a support organization in place from the very beginning. A support organization that will be taking care of the centralized policy management, but also of housekeeping items such as version handling of the policies, and that becomes crucial as you have multiple application teams writing policies at the same time. Also, we've noticed, especially in the larger organizations that we're dealing with, that when you start with one application, with one team, very quickly, many other teams within the enterprise are convinced by the use of ABAC and adapt the technology, and suddenly the scope of the technology expands, explodes even, I would be tempted to say, within the enterprise. So be ready to have a small team that can support the application owners within your enterprise. Was that a challenge for you, Roland, or did you already have that in place within the company?
No, it was not a real challenge. We had that quite good in place from the beginning. But the aspect of this version handling for itself was very important aspect, which we were aware of very early in the project, because that, as you might have mentioned, the connection to regulation is very close here, and as you externalize these policies and the authorization rules, you have to take care as much as you are used to take care of application code, which is which all companies with big IT departments are used to take care very carefully. And the same has to be done with policy and rules stuff. And so the version handling has to be implemented in a very strict and exact defined process with clear defined responsibles.
Right. And in a way, even in pre-ABAC models, you had that responsibility with different artifacts.
Indeed, yeah, that's it.
So the third recommendation from the folks at Axiomatics here, you want to plan attribute retrieval with overall response times in mind. If necessary, use data virtualization to ensure the right attributes, the correct attributes are available at all times. This is important if you want to achieve the performance you're looking for. So you want to make sure that you retrieve attributes from the right location, that they have been normalized if they need to be normalized in order to achieve the right level of performance. Point number 4 is to plan the design and deployment of policy enforcement modules in such a way that programmers have an obvious and simple interface to use. You want to make a developer's life as simple and as easy as possible. Give them a simple API, a developer-oriented API, and that might mean both making it simple from a semantic perspective, but also making it simple from a technical perspective. Provide them with a REST JSON API, for instance, to make their lives easier. And that, in fact, wraps up our webinar for today, and we're going to go ahead and move to the questions section. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And we do have quite a few questions here. And before, my apologies, before I move on to the questions, first of all, thank you very much, Roland, for taking part. It was very much appreciated. And let's have a look at the questions. So the first one, is policy-based authorization only used in the insurance industry? And the answer is no, of course not, in a way. Policy-based authorization is a very generic model. It can work literally for pretty much any industry. The main ones we see here at Axiomatics are insurance, health insurance, accident insurance, financial services, banking, the industry as well, especially regulated industries such as air and space. We also see the media sector to a lesser degree, and we also see government agencies, employment agencies, the police force, the justice departments of various countries around Europe, North and South America. Another question that just came in, can't you just add context awareness to ABAC? Well, there's only so much you can do with ABAC. Yes, you can extend ABAC with the ABAC role-based access control with additional parameters, but ABAC will always be user-centric. And unless you start programming within the application, you will struggle to express additional constraints, such as time-based constraints or location-based constraints. And more importantly, it's not just about context awareness, it's also about relationships. And if you want to compare, say, an attribute of the user with an attribute of the resource, it won't be doable in role-based access control. As a matter of fact, I have a great example from the media sector here in the United States, where a media company came to us and said, well, okay, we have an authorization model where the brand managers can only view the assets of that given brand. The thing is, we have 6 different roles, manager, editor, publisher, and so on, and we have 10 different brands. So that's 60 different roles, and that's role explosion. We don't want to manage 60 roles for such a simple use case. And I told them, well, it's not 60 different roles. It's just 6 roles with a relationship. And the relationship is checking that the brand of the user, independently of their role, by the way, is equal to the brand of the item. That makes ABAC much more manageable and much more scalable than ABAC, and it makes it easier to handle context awareness and relationships. So, did you want to add something to that question, Roland, the ability to add context awareness to ABAC?
Not very much, but I think the flexibility with these, I just call it outsourcing of authorization rules, you won't have, even if you add this context aspect to roles. It has even been done many years ago with these ABAC 2 or ABAC 3, however it is numbered, but it's not the same as you have the chance to maintain the authorization rules separately. And that is an aspect which is unbeatable with ABAC.
Absolutely. Thanks. Third question, does the overall deployment become faster if you use ABAC, or does externalized authorization slow down projects? I would be tempted to say that based on experience, for a mature customer that has a good understanding of ABAC, going to ABAC will make it faster, absolutely. Because if you want to make your authorization logic evolve, all you have to do is adapt your policies, adapt your ABAC policies, versus having to rewrite applications if you change authorization logic in a role-based environment. So the initial step might be slightly more expensive in ABAC because you have to teach individuals, developers, and architects the new model. But once you have that in place, then of course the churn is going to be much faster, and you'll be able to grow your applications much more quickly because you will be avoiding the cost of redeveloping applications to adapt to new authorization requirements. So the overall deployment is faster, yes. I don't know, Roland, if you have any facts to back that up based on your experience?
No, this time I can totally agree with you, David.
Great, I like that when that happens.
You're welcome.
A fourth question that just came in, how do you combine policies if different divisions need different policies? Do tenants update their own policies, or are they managed centrally? So there's actually two different questions. One is on the management side of things, and the other is on the operational side of things. So first of all, XACML, since this is the language we use, lets you combine policies together, even if they come from different divisions, and lets you still only apply the relevant policies, the relevant policies to the relevant authorization requests. So yes, you can have multiple policies that come from different divisions and still combine them together at runtime. That works very well. You can also inherit policies that would come from higher up, and this is great if you want to layer structure in your policies, where you might have policies that come from the compliance manager, policies that come from the chief operating officer, and eventually policies that come from a specific division. Now, on the management side of things, do tenants update their own policies, or are they managed centrally? The tenants, the ideal situation is for tenants to manage their own policies, if only because it makes the management process scale better. If you have to rely on one central team to do the entire management of policies for an entire enterprise, that team will have to grow to be able to cater for the load. So you want to make sure that you can delegate the management capability to the different tenants. Roland, did you have any feedback on that? I guess you're going to be having that challenge, not you're expanding the use of ABAC within your company.
Yes, indeed, we had this challenge, and we had implemented it in the way as you described this. But we, in addition to this, we installed a kind of gatekeeper or checkpoint that is a small team, or usually one person, and with a backup 2 persons, who has to check updated policy parts which come from several different divisions where the responsibility lies, just to keep an eye on the updated policy if it fits in the whole combined policy set or policy package, how is it called, to let it still work right, because the authorization server, as you know for sure, because you know products for this type, has to be deployed with one policy package. And this checkpoint or this gatekeeper person to be installed was quite a good idea, especially in the phase when the company gets more and more familiar with this new type and kind of forming authorization rules.
Thanks, good point. And another question here, what do you mean with no programming approach? at some point in the slides, I mentioned no programming. Well, what we meant by that is that developers no longer need to write lengthy if-else clauses. They no longer need to implement authorization logic within the app. And that's got two benefits. Number one, the quality of the authorization will be better because the developer will not be doing it. They don't have to worry about it. And number two, if you want to update the authorization, you do not need to rewrite the application. So now the authorization is no longer dependent on the development lifecycle. So that's what we meant with no programming approach. We have 2 more questions to go, and then I will release everyone. We're nearly at the top of the hour. All this work, once you intercept the request, how will this work once you intercept the request? How difficult would it be to build an interceptor for a WebSphere application server? Well, every time you want to develop an enforcement point, an interceptor, you need to look at the APIs where you want to do the interception. You need to look at the best place where to deploy your enforcement point. So one easy place where to deploy one is within web application servers such as WebSphere, WebLogic, Tomcat, these application servers, because they serve HTTP endpoints. So what you need to do is write an enforcement point capable of intercepting an HTTP flow, understanding the payload, sending off an authorization request to an authorization engine, and getting a response back. So you could do a servlet filter, you could do a web service filter, a JAX-WS filter. And the last question for today is experiences in auditing the policies. Is a very good point. In this webinar, we've been talking about the first 2 stages of the policy lifecycle, those being the requirements gathering and the policy authoring, number 1, and then the enforcement and the decision making, number 2. But there is a third part to the life cycle, and that's the auditing piece. And there's 2 types of audits, really. There's the audit of what did happen, and that is done through log analysis. It's very straightforward. And then there's the audit of what could potentially happen, and that type of audit is harder to achieve. And as a matter of fact, it's a unique Axiomatics capability to be able to do a what-if type analysis. So what we do is we run one of our engines called the reverse query on the authorization policies to understand what could potentially happen. And since we're dealing with attribute-based access control, we can fix one part of attributes, one set of attributes, and let the other ones free. For instance, I could say, what can Alice do? But I could flip it around and say, who can access insurance claim 123? And then I would get the list of users who can access or manage the insurance claim. Or in the first question, I would get the list of insurance claims that Alice can manage. And in this type of auditing, your audit question can be as vague, as broad as you like, or as specific as you like. So you could say, what can happen? What can Alice do? Or you could say, what can Alice, the manager in the sales department, do on claims that were issued between the 3rd of December and the 4th of January in the state of Illinois? You can see that the second one is a much more specific question. Both work, both are valid scenarios. And on this note, I would like to thank you all for attending and close the webinar. Roland, thank you again very much for being with us today and for answering our questions. It was very much appreciated from all of us here at Axiomatics. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Roland.
You're welcome. Yeah, it was fine for me as well.
I wish everyone a very pleasant afternoon. Thank you.